You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
So, minding the gap is about being thoughtful about the gap that can lie between us on various aspects of our lives, and to understand that this isn't just a nice thing to consider, that Jesus sees something that was central to what he was seeking to do in this world. He said that I've come to reconcile not only us to God, but us to one another. And he spoke about how the fact that God is doing a work to be able to unite people in the Father, and that when we are united with God again, it changes everything. It doesn't take away our differences. It doesn't dismiss our differences. But our differences no longer define us and divide us. And so it is that he said that the church is to be is this alternative community that God is bringing into the world, so that the world can see the reality of God that can unite. That's why he prayed for our unity. That's why he said you need to be of one mind and heart in things. And that's why for him, unity is everything. Not uniformity, not becoming the same, but unity that can unite in our differences. And so Jesus is putting this calling for us, that when he created the Westside Vineyard, he created us to be those who can take what is always pulled apart in this world and bring it back together. And that's what we've been engaging, is how God can do that, how God can bring us together, Democrats and Republicans. How long should I let this hang out there? I just felt like a long time. Yeah. Men and women, rich and poor, black and white, in every ethnicity. These are the things that we're engaging. And I would add to those, young and old. The one gap of all the gaps we've looked at that has actually had a term used to describe it was what? The generation gap. Because it was all of a sudden experienced, whoa, there is a gap. And it's a gap that lies between us. And I don't know how you may have experienced it. For me, I guess it became most real when all of a sudden I realized that my kids didn't realize how cool I was. And in that moment, I realized something is entirely wrong. They're not seeing clearly. They do not. They just rolled their eyes, and they just do not understand that what I'm saying and what I'm about. Are you kidding? I'm incredibly cool. You should ask my parents. So that may be how it gets experienced, but it is obviously about something broader. It could be summed up this way. One definition of it would be that the generation gap refers to the changes between one generation and another, both those ahead of it and behind it, of life experience, social norms, and styles, which leads to differences in our outlook, how we think about things, how we view them, how we value them, and therefore our understanding with one another is affected by that. Now, at some very basic level, or let me just say, so what I want to do is I want us to think about a little bit more about what is this generation gap, and how is it now? What does it look like? How is it affecting us? And then, secondly, we're going to look at and how is God calling us to build then a multi-generational life, which we believe He is. How does He speak to us across our ages and stages of life? Very significant, I believe. And then finally, just conclude with a calling to us, because there's something very significant I want to share with you today. But the first thing is just the nature of this generation gap, or gaps, because we're going to see there's multiple generations involved, is that there are some common things that just arise out of the stages of life. There's just something that happens when you're young. You view things one way, and the way you view older. And as you get older, then you begin to view those younger. And I would acknowledge some of these that are likely common, is that from the perspective of those who are older, who have lived longer, there's a tendency and a natural view to see those younger as not really, they don't know enough about life yet to be able to navigate it well. And there could be truth to that, but that's a common perspective. And therefore, from those who are younger, there's a natural sense that those older don't really understand current life well. You know? Like, they're not really getting it. They just seem so caught up in the past. They don't really know where life is really at, because it is moving forward. There's changes to technology and more. And it probably doesn't help when we've told them 100 stories saying, when I was your age. Any story that begins that way probably will not help the generation gap, you know? And so if we talk all about the way it was, it becomes clear that we don't seem to know much about the way it is, and so it furthers that gap. Those older may feel that those younger see them as less relevant. When those older hear younger people so focused on what's new, it can't help but leaving one who's older to feel like, well, I'm not new, so am I becoming irrelevant? And that's a very hard thing to face. And then those younger may fear that they will always have to be in a fight to be trusted, to get permission, and ultimately to have their ideas respected. Because as a young child, you always needed permission, and at some point you want to know, when do I stop needing permission? Am I always going to have that kind of put over me? So those are just common dynamics that kind of run through the ages of life, and they reflect some very significant feelings, though. And I think we need to really reflect on those things, but also understand they get accentuated as there's these cultural divisions and divides that get kind of marked out, and that spread the experience, that set things out. And so when we think about the generation gap, obviously the term first gets used in the era of the 1960s, 70s, when you have this really radical, dramatic countercultural movement, younger adults, not in total, but pretty en masse, having this very anti-establishment, you know, we don't share what those ahead of us share. We want to rise up in kind of a revolutionary fashion against some of this. And it was marked a lot by the Vietnam War, and really feeling a need to react and become a voice and to a revolution against that, by civil rights movement and by the women's liberation movement. And in all these movements, you have a radical anti-war, for equality, and all of this emerging up. And so this kind of comes bursting forth, and it created almost a dramatic, if not even sometimes humorous, radical change, of which I come in on kind of the end of that, so very much felt that, saw it type of a time. And the question might be, well, what about today? Are we still having this kind of generation gap? And those who reflect on today would tell us, I think, that today's generations often share more social similarities and cultural connection. There is not quite as dramatic of a difference, but we're also more separated by far more rapid changes in social and moral perspective, along with this technical functioning. Because culture's changing so fast that it's creating these sharp demarcations, because the experience of every 10 years is really different. You get that? I mean, every 10 years, like my youngest is going to have a world that his siblings didn't have. He never knew a world that was as technically natural or unnatural in the way that they did. I mean, it's just constantly changing. And so we also see that there's a cultural change that's more constant, and it's marked each few years with this different experience of life. One of the things that you see is that popular culture wants to kind of create the niches and wants to define this difference that lies, you know, between each group. And so if you listen to advertising, oftentimes if you think, what are they appealing to? The advertising's going for a very specific group, and it's appealing to what that group identifies with. So some ads talk about what? Like security, financial security. Are you secure? Come to, you know, and they're appealing to one group for whom that's a high value. Another will appeal to, you know, have it your way, do your own thing, be your own person, because that individuality that one generation would not have valued, another generation highly values. They've been told that's a high value, and they resonate with it. So what you start seeing is you get this incredible demarcation in which we're becoming more divided in the way we think, the way we view things, what we value, what we put a priority on. And it changes and it affects us in huge ways as we try to come around life together and some of life's questions together. There's also, though, another truth that longer lifespans have extended the number of generations that share life together. And this is quite profound in terms of talking about how we live multi-generational life as a culture and as a community of people doing that for the glory and sake of God. Consider this, that just in our immediate decades, just the recent two, since 1990s, the average lifespan has been made 9 years longer. That's incredible when you consider, I just said, just since 1990. That's incredible. Lifespans have increased from an average age of 40 at the beginning of the 20th century, and in the huge part of human history, we're not talking that big a history, to an average age of 80 in just that amount of time. That radically changes how we're experiencing life across generations. And what it means is that you and I are actually now living with the potential of having what's defined commonly, sociologically, as 6 different generations living at the same time and sharing life together and relating together. That creates a lot of potential gaps, plural, and a lot of incredible things beautifully in terms of gathering. But let me just note these generations, and maybe you'll identify and are a part of, because here, let me just mention. One is the builder generation. The builder generation. Some refer to them as the traditionalists, and they were those born before 1925. My father would be in that generation. And whether as adults or children, the builder generation, they strive through World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, Black Tuesday, and Pearl Harbor. And so naturally they have tended to become those who are incredibly hardworking, incredibly loyal, and patriotic to the cause. And at the same time, incredibly private, or tending to be more private, because to do that, to get through all that, your own feelings were not at the forefront of things. You kind of put those secondary. And you move through, bound together in those kind of loyalties. But also, they're the generation most generous, most self-sacrificing, and most of what you and I enjoy today was because of that generation. They built it. They built most churches. They built most nonprofits. They built most of what others enjoy by their sacrifice. A remarkable generation. Those that followed are referred to sometimes as the silent generation, born between 1926 and 1945. My mother would just kind of fall into that. In many regards, the silent generation, or the one referred to that, is those who really are an extension of the builder generation, could be grouped into that. The difference that's noted is that they grew up with their prime young adult years during the 1950s, where things were now becoming more prosperous. So they weren't as outspoken about things. They weren't fighting and striving in the same way, so they were deemed the silent generation. The baby boomers followed, born between 1946 and 1964, which would include myself at the tail end of that. And boomers are characterized as being individualistic, dominant, concerned oftentimes with their own sense of comfort and power, because they had an opportunity to do things nobody else had, to work for what they wanted. And so they were deeply in touch with that, which was why the baby boomers, of which many of you are part, were also referred to as the me generation. Because for the first time, instead of being so defined by the common good, there was a little bit of, I can now do what's good for me. And that changed things a lot. But it also brought this incredible sense of faith and optimism about potential, much wider, greater possibilities than could have been seen before, because based on the success of the previous generations, they were in a position to do so. Baby busters followed that, often referred to as Gen X. Those born between 1965 and 1980, my wife would be a part of that. And she reminds me of it all the time. The busters desire a more influence and respect, because sometimes the other generation have been so domineering, so they've kind of come in to seek that. But also, with a clear sense of meaning and direction in life. They place a high value on relationships because, again, they can kind of afford to. They're not striving just for success, and so they've kind of gotten more in touch with the need. They don't want a generation who just wants to create the product. They want a generation who creates people. And they will not always let product or profits come ahead of people. And that's been a tendency with that generation. And then comes the millennials, of which the majority of youth are a part, born between 1981 and 2001. 3 of my children would fall into that. And millennial generation is considered one of the most distinct because it is the most diverse generation. Not just diverse, but comfortable with diversity in a way that was never experienced. They are almost leading the way in it. If you think about it this way, when older generations were in their workplace, and this includes some of us, when yes, you worked with people who were racially different and all that, but when work was over, you went home to your group of affinity. Young millennials, they're just naturally doing life with those who are more diverse. And again, I'm not trying to draw absolute lines, but that's a very common tendency there. And so they have a lot to bring to their ability to now navigate more comfortably the diversity that we have as a culture. And they want to have impact, and they have a high value for meaning. What is the meaning of things? And that's a great virtue. And then finally, there's the unnamed next generation. People are giving names to it, but it's those who are 15 years old and under, of which my youngest child would be a part of that. And I want to tell you that with all these generations, you begin to see how there is radically different life experiences in each of those. And those experiences shape the way that you think about what matters, the way we should think about things, priorities. It affects everything. It affects the way we relate to work, technology, money, family. All of these issues, we relate differently to them. Or to quote one this way, although the generations live in the same world, they do not experience the world in the same way. And that's the reality for us. That's the reality for us. And here's what I want to share with you that I think is so amazing, and I hope you can grasp how significant this is, and that's this. That right here in this room, we have every one of those generations. That's amazing. Somewhere across our gathering this morning in different parts, all these generations are right here. I won't call you out, but trust me. And here's what's striking about it. We were the opposite when we began. We were the narrowest group of people by age you could imagine. I began attending this church when I was 25 years old. And that shocked you. You're freaking out, Cindy. I know. That's like, somebody help her. And you know what? But here's the thing. Everybody was kind of like me. There had actually been an older group of people initially gathered, but what kind of was transitioning was to this kind of group of those who were mostly in like mid-20s to early 30s. That was the centrality of who was there most. Again, broader group of lives, but that's who was at the center. Very few married. So as the years went on, more and more we're getting a little older and getting married, and so, that starts to shift. And so at some point as we're going forward, we're moving in, and when we moved into this facility 15 years ago, now significantly older, there was a number of things that began to happen and emerge. For one, God was really impressing in my heart and to many of us, we have got to look behind us. We're not going to wait. That's what I said then. We're not going to wait. This is the year 2000. We are going to do everything we can to invest in those that come behind us. I began to gather some young adults to that end, and they just took off and flourished as a community of lives and leaders that are growing. But we're moving in this building. This is beginning to happen, and what happened is a lot of families who had children were starting to head towards where those children were emerging to the next stage of life, which has meant youth. And we started realizing we're going to actually have a very regular kind of group of youth with us. That's really cool. And by moving in here and somehow having a facility more legitimates you as a church, I guess, or puts you more local, a lot of older people, older than I, by 10, 20, 30 years were coming. And it's like, wow. So quickly, we had newborns, children, youth, our young adults, our own generation, and many older. And suddenly we realized, wow, We are a multi-generational church. And we started to realize what a gift that is. But God began to impress about a year ago how we want to move from being a multi-generational church to building a multi-generational church. Because merely having circumstances create you, that does not mean you're going to do it well. It just means, for right now, those are the circumstances. How can we do well? How can we move from being reactive and just saying, well, I guess we accommodate this or adopt some things, to actually being more proactive and saying, what does God want us to do? So I want to invite you to quickly think with me a few ways in which I think God speaks to us about his guiding wisdom, if you will, towards being and living well as multi-generational people. We read in the book of Acts where the Holy Spirit comes down upon the church. Jesus said, I'm going to birth something in this world. And this is going to be this alternative society. And in this society, I'm going to be doing a work, and it's going to be reconciling people to God and each other. And the Holy Spirit comes. And Peter's describing how the Spirit fell and what was happening. And he reaches back to the prophets, and this is what he says in Acts 2. He says, he reminds the people that God said, in the last day, God says, I will pour out my Spirit upon all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Wait a minute, children don't do that. That was for the older to do. Do you understand this was itself a little bit prophetic and provocative? Your young men will see visions and your old men will dream dreams. Do you hear a little flip in there? Who normally dreams? The young. Who normally sees visions? Old. It's flipping it. In those days I will pour out my Spirit even on my servants, men and women alike. And let me tell you, that was provocative. And they will prophesy. He is saying that God's ultimate desire and design is to draw together across genders, but also across young and old, across these stages of life. God will be bringing together those. And notice he doesn't dismiss the differences. He doesn't say there are no young and old. He doesn't say that there are no men and women. He's saying that there's something that's going to be able to come together because they will become that which blesses, that they can work together, that will play their roles with each other. And that's God's heart to us. And we mostly know this. I see it lived out by us. But I would remind us of the need to see that in the midst of our cynical sometimes, oh, the young, the old, and all that. That we need to hear the heart of God in this way. It's what Paul then, the apostle who followed, he begins to speak to the church about the way that we need to be the body of Christ. And what he meant by the body, or the body of Christ, is saying Jesus ascended from his bodily life here, but brings his Spirit upon the church so that we become like his body. In all of our multitude of bodily lives, we together are, in a sense, God working in the world, Jesus working through us now. And if we understand that, we begin to understand we have a high responsibility, and that's to be a proper member of the body and relate well. So he says in 1 Corinthians 12, he says, yes, there's many parts of the body, but there's only one body. It must see itself in relationship to each other. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. He's saying that's as crazy as the way that we sometimes will tend to look at each other, and we can. He says, in fact, some parts of the body that seem, listen to this, weakest and least important are actually the most necessary. Now, in this room right now, every one of us, when we think of the weakest, we're thinking of very different people. When we think of the least important, you might be identifying a different group. But whoever you think of, he's saying, may actually be the most necessary. And the parts we regard as less honorable, and you can decide who that is for you, are those we clothe with greatest care. So for some, children, who needs children? For some, the oldest, the eldest, who needs them? Do you hear those words? We clothe those that we might deem the least. We clothe them with the greatest honor. That is what he speaks to us. And so the first principle that I think God would speak to us about being multi-generational is this, that each stage in life is a gift to the other and needs the other. We were meant to be, whatever stage you're at now, you have something in your stage and in your cultural connection that the rest of us need. And one of the great verses to this end is Proverbs 20:29. It notices this distinction. It says, the glory of the young is their strength. The gray hair of experience is the splendor of the old. I love that verse for some reason. I don't know. It just has a special place in my heart, and I feel a sense of splendor, but it really says something so simple that we just need to kind of hear, like, I know that, but why don't I grasp it? Why don't I live it? Why don't I let it speak to me? And that is this, that when you're younger, you do have more strength and vitality. And when you're older, you have more experience and therefore perspective and wisdom. And try to do life without those two. As those get older, they start relying on the strength of the younger. But those younger do well to rely on the wisdom they don't have in the older. And you see this kind of coming together. And the truth is, we need, in the midst of our kind of cynical potential, to really celebrate rather than criticize the generational differences. We need the builder's generation of self-sacrifice and generosity. I'm telling you, we need it more than we know. Because we're seeing a generation pass, many of whom have already passed, who have something that we're all living on and don't realize it. A level of sacrifice that most of us do not naturally have. And we do very well to not only honor, but to seek that quality of sacrifice that went before us. We need it. And we need the baby boomers' optimism that gives a bold faith to say there's a lot more potential. Because we're not in survival. We didn't get raised in survival mode. And so there's a chance to have a lot of bold vision in life, as boomers often did. And we need baby busters, the Gen Xers, the love of community, and really seeking to have community in a way that wasn't there. And we need the millennials' passion for meaning and their comfort with diversity. We need all of these. And we need to say, gosh, I see something in you that actually doesn't come as naturally to me. I need what you bring to God's working in this world. And let me just continue with just the specifics of that. Everything else really follows, which is this, point number 2. Adults need children. I didn't say children need adults. That's true too. But adults need children. We really need to think, when you hear that, you might say, yeah, that's kind of a warm fuzzy, I may or may not relate to it. I guess kids are okay, but maybe I kind of like to just avoid them because they're frustrating, or maybe I kind of like them. I don't know. But Jesus does something where as you may recall, where he takes it to not another, he doesn't just say you're responsible for children. No. He says you need them. And we need to really hear that. You may recall, and we see it recorded in Mark 10, this encounter, this powerful encounter. It says some people brought their children to Jesus so that he could bless them by laying their hands on them. They were so excited. I'm going to bring my child, and this man of God is the one who seems to be coming and representing God. Oh, but his disciples told the people to stop bothering him because children were deemed to be not even hardly human. You might remember, they're really, once you haven't reached bar mitzvah age, he's probably speaking of those under the age of 13 here. They really weren't kind of given the validity in terms of their humanity and respect and such at this point, or at least could be naturally looked down on. We do the same today, but it was probably that kind of dynamic. So they're looked upon that way. But when Jesus saw this, he became angry and said, let the children come to me. Don't try to stop them. People who are like these little children belong to the kingdom, the work that God's doing to rule. I promise that you cannot get into God's kingdom unless you accept it the way a child does. See, I don't even like the way children accept things. See, that puts us off. And yet he's saying, well, then you ought to take a look because you need what they got. There's something about their disposition. He's not saying that we were all to become childish, but we are to become childlike in some form or fashion. There's something there, and you need it, is what he would say to them. Then Jesus took the children in his arms, and he blessed them by placing his hands on them. We might think, it's a nice moment. It's not really a nice moment. He rebuked them because he's saying, you don't see what God sees. And I think he'd say to some of us today, when you see children, do you see what God sees? There's something there he wants to bless. Are you going to bless it? Are you? Are you really in your heart going to bless what God sees in children? Oh, but they're so kind of childlike in their faith. Yep. But I'm smarter now. I don't think like them. Nope, you've just matured your stupidity. I'm sorry to say. That's God's point of view. Because the wisdom of this world isn't that great. So yes, you are smarter, and yes, you think more sophisticated. That does not mean that you really see yourself for who you really are. We think, yeah, but I'm much more in control of the world. Wow. I think from God's point, we just sound stupid in the way that we grow up believing that we have control of the world. Like children don't believe that. They think adults have control of the world because adults think they have control of the world. No, we don't. And so there's something in them we need. We need them. And I want to say to you, there's kids right now that need you. They need you, but you need them. And thirdly, those younger should seek and honor the wisdom of the older, and those older should not look down on the leadership of the younger. There is something that is very valuable and true about the need for younger to really seek and honor those who are older, because they've earned it. They've earned it by the years that they have lived that those younger have not lived. Job 12:12 says, wisdom is with the aged and understanding in length of days. If you think of that, what it's saying is, when you're younger, you just never can have what those older have. They actually have gained from longer days. That's experience. That gives perspective. And how valuable that is and how needed in the age of information. Because we live at a time in which information is just, you can grab all the information you want. It's accessible to everyone. So younger people have gazillion times more information at their hands. What's the problem? No perspective on the information. Information overload just asks the question, well then, what matters? I don't have perspective on what matters. Or to put it this way, which I think we do well to understand, it doesn't matter what we might know if we don't know what matters. And there's the problem. How do we know what matters? That's the difference between information and wisdom, or intellect and wisdom, or knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom is making sense or meaning of all the knowledge. And that is something that only comes what? With years to give perspective. And so there's something there so deeply needed. And so we all need to look at those anyone who's 10 years older than you, that doesn't mean that they inherently are wiser. That doesn't always come with age. But there's something to realize that they've got 10 more years of life than you. And there's some who have 10, 20, 30, 40 years more life than you. But there's something there to seek. There's something there to honor. But it's very clear that those older are not to look down on the leadership of those younger. And not to just sit there and go, well, you don't know enough. That can't be the default on that. It doesn't. There is something there to be valued in the strength and the initiative and the leadership of those younger. That's why when Paul is writing to Timothy, who was clearly younger, and he left him to lead a group of people, and he was young for that. It would be like leaving a church and you don't put the mother or father in charge, you put their middle-aged son involved. That's a dynamic. And what does he write to Timothy at that point? He says to him, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and purity. It's a beautiful statement because he doesn't say, hey, you're a know-it-all. Just knowledge earns you the right. No, he says you have to earn the right. But earn it and set an example in the whole of your life. Stuff that you're going to have to work at. Faith, purity, all these things. But as you do it, don't let anyone there look down on your leadership. And that's a word to so many of us who want to say, well, younger lives need to earn it. Yeah, and as they earn it, they need to have it extended to them. And we can't look down on that. We need to encourage it. And we're going to have to open that up within our own minds. Fourthly, those older have responsibility to impart the things of God to those younger, including understanding, experience, and ultimately leadership. There's an impartation, there's a sense of taking whatever you have in you of God. Now, some of you might go, I don't know if I have much of God in me. I'm just deciding what I believe. But God's begun something in you. And whatever He's begun in you, whatever you would describe as, I have a sense of God or some clarity on God, or it's growing, or I have 20, 30, 40 years of walking faithfully with God, whatever it is a deposit into you that those behind you are going to need. You need to do something with what's been deposited. Listen to the words of the psalmist who captures something about life. He writes in Psalm 78, I will teach you hidden things, what? From the past. Stories that we have heard and known, stories of our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders. For He issued His laws to Jacob. He gave His instructions to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children, so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, and they in turn will teach their own children. So each generation should, what? Set its hope anew on God. Did it say we'll have some academic knowledge of God? No. Whatever it's imparted is ultimately that you help another generation set its trust upon God, which means knowledge, but a lot more. It also means experiencing it, stepping out, figuring it out, that God can be trusted, and actually starting to live radically in that reality, not forgetting His glorious miracles and obeying His commands. He's seeing that life, all of life, has always got to be passed on in every way, biologically, intellectually, but also spiritually. And that this is not merely a matter of something that we do by just knowledge. It has to do with the whole of one's life and how we bring to it. And so we read in 2 Timothy, again, where he's speaking now to Timothy about their relationship. And he says in 2 Timothy 3:10, but you know all about, he's saying to Timothy, the one he had mentored, you know all about what? My teachings. But does he stop there? No. My teachings, my way of life, my purpose, my faith, my patience, my love, and my endurance. Young people, those younger than us, they don't just need knowledge. They don't just need our teaching. They don't just need academic truths or propositions. They also need to experience it embodied in us. They even need to know how you struggle for it. Yes, you do struggle for all those things, but you struggle for them, and you have something you're learning just in your own struggle that needs to be imparted to those who follow. Just like somebody teaches you how to open up a can, or do anything else technology-wise, or anything. Just like you learn something from someone, the things of knowing God are something we pass on, like endurance and working through it, learning to love, learning to be patient, all of these things. And I'm finding that conversation grows as the years go on. In the last couple months, just in my son, the one going off to start college, one in his third year, and just the conversations we're having are changing, because we're talking about deeper things. We're talking about, not about how to be successful. The question I have for them is to think about, what is success? What is success? You just start getting into a deeper, bigger part of life. How do you think about thinking? And so it is that we need to share more and open up them to think well and wise. And finally, point number 5, we must never stop investing in those who come behind us. Simply to say, it never ends. I won't even look at another text, because the last text actually said it. It goes from generation to generation, on and on. It is not a matter of passing from one generation to another. It's the fact that there's always somebody younger than you, always somebody 10 years younger than you. Unless there's an infant in this room, that's the only person I'm not speaking to. If you're 15 years old, there's a 5-year-old who needs you. And the sooner you get that in life, the more that you're going to live dynamically faithful to God in these things. If you don't right now think that you have any responsibility for those 10 years younger than you, then you won't get this. Multi-generational life begins when we realize there's always someone younger. And I, in a sense, need to think about them. I can at least start praying for them. I can at least start looking at them and asking God to show me things. And maybe I can start to build relationship with them. That's the heart of God. That's what we've said we would take up in our hearts as a community as we want to build these things. And so it is that God has been leading us to do that, to go from being multi-generational to actually building multi-generational life. Recognizing that so many who have gone before us have not thought enough, and we need to think and be humbled to realize that many churches just got older and wondered why nobody was behind them. And then there's those churches that are just now kind of starting all in their 20s, and it's kind of about their generational identity. But what happens when you go forward with that? How do you move forward if you're kind of all about that generational identity? And that we have got to think well and wise about these things. And so we feel like we're at a juncture where God's leading us towards a more integrated future together. As many of you know, it was about 14 years ago that as we began to gather those younger adults behind us and began to lead them into some home groups, and those couple home groups then began to, we launched a gathering on Sunday evenings. And from that gathering, it's been amazing to see the raising up of their lives together as they love each other and spur each other on. But also their leadership, which is remarkable. And in the midst of all that, you have lives that have met each other and created lifelong friendships. It's incredible. And I know they'll be lifelong because they remind me of me and some of the relationships I've had. Many have gotten married to each other. Many have now had children. So incredible things have come from this. But we feel, it started several months ago, feeling like God is beginning to lead us to see some of the challenges to it that they're faced with and how to work it out. And that we need to think about being a more integrated community. And so we have been preparing to actually wind up that distinct gathering and no longer be the same gathering in the morning because we want to integrate together. And so actually this evening is going to be the last Sunday evening gathering. And they've all know that, and they're all, for the most part that I know, and I've been meeting with them, really looking forward to kind of integrating across at this juncture. One of the things we recognize this allows is it allows them not to have this challenge where there's this arbitrary break in community, because what happens is you suddenly get older and now it's supposed to be about younger life. So where do you go with that? So all of a sudden they don't feel connected to this community of lives, and there's a lot of distance, but they're not so connected easily to those they've been with. And if they get married or have a child in particular, they really feel they have to make that change, but it doesn't feel natural. So one of the things we want to do is not create this break and this big gap, but create continuity by saying, let's gather together in the larger gathering across with younger adults, and then allow them, though, to have home churches and other gatherings that allow them to build community that they deeply need, to have community among themselves if they choose to want to continue that, which many of them do, and I would encourage them to do. I think they need to build incredible community as younger adults with themselves, but also be connected to the larger gathering. Another thing that it does that we need so much is it brings them into the forefront and face of our own community, because we are getting older and the community out there is actually having a lot of younger professionals coming in, and they're the ones starting to lead. And we want to engage that community, and we need those that are really most naturally at the forefront of that, to be at the forefront of that. So I'm not really welcoming merely these lives to just join us. That's not it. I'm inviting these lives to help lead us. We're more merging. This is not a takeover by any part. This is us saying, let's move forward a little more integrated into our future. And the reason I'm very naturally excited about this, and I really am, is because from what I see and what I've known, these are some of the most remarkable lives and some of the healthiest leaders. And I feel a deep need and indebtedness to them and their willingness to come and be a part. And they have a heart for that. They have a real heart. They want to be needed. They are builders, and they want to be building together. And so beginning next week, we'll begin to have that change where we will all be joining up in the mornings. And then at the start of the new year, though, we'll probably be integrating more and more of their leadership into areas of ministry. Because we're hitting the holidays right now, so we're not going to try to do all of that. But that's kind of what we anticipate, and so we'll see more. We'll move, and they'll begin to help lead in prayer in some other areas as we move into the new year. And we're looking towards high school as another age and stage of life, which we really believe can be integrated in more. We sat as a group of elders, and some are parents and have been through all these stages, and we asked the question, what do we think about high schoolers being a part of our larger gatherings in this way? And then what was fascinating, it's just fascinating, unanimous by those who had high schoolers, yes. They are already dealing with life at almost many of the adult dynamics that we do. And they would do well, and it will be good long-term for their faith to be tied in with a community that is engaging that. They're going to have to navigate their faith very soon. And yes, it could be really good to make that connection now. I asked the same question about middle schoolers. Unanimous? No. Don't think that would probably work very well. There's a real shift that comes in there. It was fascinating to me. But I want you to hear how we're thinking about these things. And we haven't shared that with parents, and we see a little bit more process ahead regarding high school youth. But that's what we're thinking to perhaps start at the start of the year. And I want to close with this, that building a multi-generational community, it calls out something that has to expand in us. So I want to ask you if you would join me in opening your heart to expanding these three things in you. The first of those is comfort. We've got to expand our sense of comfort. By comfort, I'm referring to the styles by which we do things. One of the things that I admire, and I shared this earlier without planning it, is just that I look around this room and I know there's a lot of willingness to sacrifice your comfort. That is, by that I mean what's familiar to you in style and format and all of those things. A lot of you go, this wouldn't be my choice of music. A lot of you go, Brad, you're not my choice of your tone in some things. But I'm willing to stretch my sense of comfort for that sake. And I just want to say, I really admire, I see that here. We never have wars over those kind of things. We kind of keep first things first. But we all need to go, but I do need to always be challenged about that. Because the truth is, most people, if something is most naturally comfortable for you, you don't tend to think about how it might not be comfortable for others. You just assume, well, I like it this way, so I'm sure they can get along with it. But sometimes people don't feel it really connects with them, because connection's not just relationship. It also means that when I come, it feels like it's for me. So we need to, if this is going to be for a wider group, then it will bring some element of change. And the challenge I have is, will you expand your sense of comfort for the sake of us being able to gather in that dynamic? And secondly, it's control. Will we expand our sense of control? Because at some level, kind of underneath the surface is often, hey, I'm cool with changes as long as I'm the one controlling the choices for those changes. Control, influence. Influence has to be earned, but when it's earned, will it be expanded? And sometimes it's hard for me to look and, I don't think of myself as older. What naivete. But I look and I think, so gosh, somebody else seems kind of young to be leading, if they're leading something. And Joel, who's been pastor in the emerging generations, and my good friend, he always says, Brad, do you realize that when you took over this church, you were 30 years old? I'm like, really? Like I forgot it somehow. So these lives you're looking at, they were older than you were. Wow. And I realized that we all need to expand our sense of control and influence. And lastly, connection. We need to expand our sense of connection. It means that our goal is to get through the awkwardness so that people aren't just sitting next to us. And even right now you have people 10, 20 years different than you right around you. Don't check their age. I got in trouble already. But more than sitting next to each other, we need to learn to share our lives and to be open and to listen. This whole series has been about trying to understand people instead of just being separated by them. And once you get underneath them, there's an example. And it's also a good example of the fact that it runs through every country now. The whole world, as it globalizes, and that's why I found this picture so much. As the world globalizes, this is being felt everywhere. And I want to say to you in closing that the reason we're here, if we think about it, is because there were those who went before us. And they were, going back to the 70s in particular, they sat there and said, wow, there's this whole culture and it's like changing, this younger culture. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll was the way that was, the whole hippie generation was kind of defined. So what do you think they thought when they found out tons of these people want to pursue Jesus? They see something in Jesus revolutionary and they want to pursue him. But they're all also kind of fraught with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What do you think they thought? Forget it. It's too dangerous. I don't let these people in. Pull up the drawbridge. Most did. But a few didn't. A few said, you know what? Yeah, there's dangers to be considered by that next group and that difference, but there's also something of God working in them. In fact, maybe they need to change us. Maybe there's ways we need to change. And we need to define that. We need to be careful. But there are things we need to look at. And that is what launched the massive movement of churches like the Vineyard. So the question I have for you, will you join me in following suit? Willing to look not critically and cynically, although there's a place for that, but rising above that for the sake of saying God is at work. And there's something he's doing in the next generation. And I will not let my criticalness keep me from connecting with it. Amen? Let's stand and close in prayer. God, we've been here just honestly, we've been here a while today, but we really want to be honest with you that we are those who are inherently overly identified with our own generation. And everything in the world around us is trying to pull us apart because it gains from us being so identified with our own unique generation. Forgive us. We offer ourselves to you now as those who need to be able to learn that we are meant to be a gift to others, and we need the gift that they bring to us. And we offer you in this moment, at this kind of like altar as we stand before you, we bring and want to offer you an expanding sense of our comfort, that we would offer you our comfort and let you help us become more expanded, more flexible. And we offer you our sense of control and influence and help us to be wise, but to be open to let others be the ones who help lead. And we offer you our hearts to relate to others across. And we thank you and we give ourselves afresh to the fact that you are the one who has created the church and created the Westside Vineyard to bring together everything this world is pulling apart. So we come not only as Democrats, Republicans, men and women, and across all of our differences, but we come as young and old. And we say, help us bring it together. In the name of Jesus and for the glory of Jesus, we pray. Amen. And let's sing.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.